acupuncture, it like reawakens those aspects of us that actually know how to take care and heal ourselves. So people will often be at my table and I'll come in and the room is like utterly quiet. It's so still. And they'll go, wow, what did you do? I'm so calm. Mm-hmm. It's like, that's right. And that calm doesn't come from the outside. That calm is actually in you. It's innate to you, right? Or they'll go, wow, my shoulder feels fine. I can get up. I can move it all over the place. I go, because that's innate to you. You do that. The acupuncture didn't put anything in. It just wakes up the body's own ability to do these things.
Hello and welcome to the Weight Free Wellness Podcast. Today's guest is Michael Max. He is an acupuncturist and he's also the host of the Everyday Acupuncture Podcast. So we talk about some really great things here, dispelling the myths about acupuncture, like is it going to hurt or does it work for everybody or for everything? He was a great guest to have on this subject because at Weight Free Wellness, we were really about shedding the light on the many paths to healing, and there are many. And I'm wondering if you have gone to Weight Free Wellness yet and taken the body type quiz, because this is actually a great precursor to understanding acupuncture and traditional Chinese medicine better. By knowing your body type, you're actually learning the very valuable basics of acupuncture. And I encourage you to go to weightfreewellness.com, take the body typing quiz, which is also will send you a link for my ebook, which is the body typing book, You-niversal Self-care. So some really great goodies there. We have some really great podcasters coming up in the future here, lots of great events. So stay tuned to Facebook, especially. We're most active there, but you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and so forth. I love hearing from you, so please drop us a line or drop me a line. We'd love to hear from you. So here you go. Here is my interview with Michael Max. Enjoy. Well, Michael, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so excited for our talk about acupuncture.
I'm really happy to be here. It's something that I can go on and on about because it's so interesting to me.
It's a fascinating subject, and I have to say I'm known by people close to me as a person who loves to study. I can get lost in the studying about traditional Chinese medicine and the concepts. It seems never ending.
Well, it is never ending. One of the things about it is if you plan to study it or especially practice it, you've signed on for lifelong learning. There is absolutely no end to it.
So let's start from the beginning here. You are an acupuncturist, or would it be accurate to say a Chinese medicine practitioner?
Yeah, you could call me either one.
Okay.
Yeah.
So why did you get into this field? Did I just open up a can of worms here?
Yeah. So, I mean, I say this a little tongue in cheek, but it's also true.
Yeah.
Bad luck. Okay. Bad luck in that I had some chronic respiratory issues that plagued me for a lot of my life. And I'm not going to go into why I got those, but I just knew that I had them. And there came a point where a friend of mine, probably 30-ish years ago, said, I'm tired of listening to your cough. Go get yourself some acupuncture. And I'm a pretty open-minded guy, but I thought, really, dude? Acupuncture? And he was very insistent, and he really badgered me, actually. And so I went to this local acupuncture school where in Seattle, where I lived at the time. And I started getting treatment. And it, oddly enough, I mean, from the very first treatment, something shifted. And the very curious thing about what shifted is it had nothing to do with my cough. But I came away from the treatment and like for the next week, I was sleeping better. I was digesting better. My mood, I had no idea how irritable I actually was because my mood was so different. And so I went for a series of treatments after that. And eventually my lungs began to change. And it even got to the point where I'd get a head cold, and then afterwards I would not get a cough, which was, I mean, that had never happened to me in the history of my life that I could remember. So I started using acupuncture just for my health care, basically. And then I got curious about it. And I got a little more curious, and I started reading some books, and I read a little more, and the more I read, the more curious I got. And it got to the point where if I wanted to know more, I'd really have to go to school. And I was in the middle of a wonderful high-tech career. You know, I had student loans paid off. I'm thinking, really? Acupuncture? But it sort of drew me. And so I just kept following, and that was 20 years ago.
It's really a synopsis of the classic healer's journey, right? Where we have something that we need to cure in ourselves, and it sparks our interest to get into those realms.
It sometimes can open up something in us that we had no idea was there.
Right.
I mean, the funny thing for me is I've avoided medicine my whole life. I don't even like being around sick people. Right? And yet, so why do I do what I do? One of the reasons is because Chinese medicine has this lovely way of looking at people. Yes, on one hand, there's we can call it the illness. But on the other hand, there's a thing that we can call the wellness. You can actually use the wellness to treat the illness. So even when people come in, they're sick, I focus more on this.
Well, that's a really good point, too, for a next question is, what is the fundamental difference between our allopathic medicine and traditional Chinese medicine? Fundamentally, what's the difference? You didn't prep you on this one. That's
No, you didn't prep me on this. So, wow, that's a great question. I would say what is the fundamental difference? I was going to go with what comes up, and there's more than one right answer to this.
I agree. Okay?
The answer that comes up for me right now is our allopathic medicine sees a bag of skin that is not connected to its environment, and we need to take care of the things that have to do with the bag of skin. And Chinese medicine does not see the body separate from the environment. It doesn't see the emotions or the, let's call it the mental aspect of us, separate from the heart aspect of us, separate from the physicality of us. All these things are absolutely interconnected, which is why you get into looking at systems like the 5 elements. And it can sound really goofy and woo-woo because you go, oh, the direction of east, well, that connects to the liver. Well, we're actually talking about resonances of how nature is all connected to itself. And so Chinese medicine, very, very, and I would call it an ancient science. It's not Western science. I mean, Western science is great and it's useful for a certain point of view. It's great at looking at pieces. But this older, I'm going to call it Asian science, is really wonderful at looking at the connections between the pieces. And so a lot of Chinese medicine, while it can look at the pieces, it also looks at the connections between the pieces.
There's really such beautiful poetry also in looking at the macro and the micro. And how these things affect each other, and they can relate in so many realms. And to me, what's really fascinating too, not to say that they're the same, but there are these commonalities among these ancient sciences, the ancient medicine sciences, even in India and primarily. But there are remnants you see cross-culturally, which is, says to me, like, okay, there's something to this.
There might be something to it.
Yeah.
Yes, I would completely agree.
Yeah. It's really fascinating. So you're saying allopathic medicine, looking at the bag of skin, what's going on, how do we pick it apart and treat it, and then traditional Chinese medicine. And again, this is a synopsis, and I agree there are many answers to this, but is looking at multiple facets. What is this person like? What are their patterns? What is the environmental patterns? What is their emotional makeup? And so many things. Yes.
That question about what is the person like? This is a really interesting thing because it gets into, for lack of a better word, constitutional types, which is an aspect of Chinese medicine. And again, depending on which aspect of the tradition you're looking at, you'll see different things. If you're looking at it from the 5 element type, you're looking at wood, fire, earth, metal, water. There are different body types. There are different sort of personality types, for lack of a better word. There's other ways of looking at constitution, which, again, it gives you kind of a sense of how an individual is and how they respond to the world. And the reason why that's helpful is because people are generally best helped when you're addressing sort of who they are, right? If somebody really processes through, say, their mentality, and you approach them with a very emotionally based type of treatment, it's probably going to confuse them and they're just not going to get it. Right? Whereas if you first approach them through the mentality, they got that. That's a language that they speak. You connect with that. Actually, once you connect with that, you can go all around the cycle. You can connect all kinds of other things. So I think it's important to know where strengths are and where weaknesses are so that you can use the strengths to help the weaknesses.
So now I knew jumping into this podcast, it would be a challenge to try to wrap up the whole concept of what is traditional Chinese medicine, because it is there's so much to it, but I thought it was worth a try. And with you and your podcast, which we'll talk more in depth about later, I thought, okay, this is the guy to have this talk with. And so I think most people, and even I did not too long ago, thought that traditional Chinese medicine and acupuncture were just a practitioner putting needles in you. But it's not just that. I mean, what else is a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner going to do with a person in a session or look at?
I'm going to answer that question, but I want to say something else first. And that is, there's not one integrated Chinese medicine. Chinese medicine is thousands of years old. There's lots of different family traditions. It has been looked at and practiced differently through the different dynasties. And so there's not one Chinese medicine. There's lots of things that fall under the rubric of Chinese medicine. And that even includes acupuncture. There's not just one style of acupuncture. There's all kinds of styles of acupuncture. And it's not like there's one true one or one right one. It's more a matter of, can you understand that particular system that's being used and then be able to apply it? So do keep in mind, it's not one sort of homogenous thing. It's a whole ecosystem of medical practices. What happens when you put an acupuncture needle into somebody? Oh man, I've been at this for like 20 years and it's still a question. I never know what I'm going to say when I'm asked that question, because it's still something that I feel like I learn all the time. At this stage of the game, I would say what acupuncture does, unlike what Western medicine does, I mean, we think of needles, we think of injecting something into the body, right? We're putting something in, we're trying to take something from the outside to change the inside. I would say acupuncture is exactly the opposite of that. Acupuncture doesn't put anything into the body, I mean, other than a needle. Right? It's not trying to put something into the system. It's actually trying to call something out of the system. So our blueprint for life is to grow, develop, regenerate, recover, restore. At some point die, but in the time of living, the blueprint is to be well and and self-regenerate. Sometimes there are things that come in and block that mechanism. And we can go into all the different reasons later if you like, but we all know things get stuck, be it trauma or illness or mental attitudes that we have. Acupuncture, it like reawakens those aspects of us that actually know how to take care and heal ourselves. So people will often be at my table and I'll come in and the room is like utterly quiet. It's so still. And they'll go, wow, what did you do? I'm so calm. It's like, that's right. And that calm doesn't come from the outside. That calm is actually in you. It's innate to you, right? Or they'll go, wow, my shoulder feels fine. I can get up. I can move it all over the place. I go, because that's innate to you. You do that. The acupuncture didn't put anything in. It just wakes up the body's own ability to do these things.
Yeah, without... like you said, it's so hard to describe and you're not even sure if you know how it works.
Well, I've got an idea about how it works.
Well, explain to us.
I mean, I do it for a living.
Yeah. So what is the concept of how it does work?
I would say fundamentally the concept of how it works is to take those areas that are stuck or shut down or not moving or somehow stagnated or somehow blocked, and it opens them up. And then nature takes care of the rest of it. So the very simple metaphor that often gets used is there's a stream running through the woods, a nice clear running stream, and a log falls in it. And when a log falls in it, you have two things happen. You get an excess on one side, which is a pooling of water, and you get a deficiency on the other side, which is a very tiny trickle to the stream. But a healthy stream doesn't have a pooling of water and a trickle downstream, right? In a human being, we might see it as, a certain blockage. Oh, they have excess on one side. Now they've got headaches. And a deficiency on the other. Maybe there's problems with the menstrual cycle or something, or their digestion. Acupuncture takes the blockage out of the stream. And what the stream does after that is just what streams do. They flow the way they flow when they're unobstructed. So, it sounds very simple and it's kind of poetic. It's like, how the heck is that actually medicine? But I think most of us, if we look at experiences of things that have gotten in the way of our well-being, whether it's on an emotional level, mental level, physical level, relational level for that matter, you take the blocks out, things kind of work themselves out, right?
Right. Yeah. What comes to mind is even if you've been in a really stressful situation for a long time and all of a sudden that stress is removed for whatever reason or however, and all the things that right themselves just automatically.
That's right. Yeah. So acupuncture works that way. In many ways, I know people hear about channels and they think it's kind of mystical and blah, 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 but really acupuncture is basically like plumbing. Find the clog, take the clog out.
And it's almost like I wanted to have this wonderful discussion about it, but it's almost like I want to say to people, just try it. Like it's almost like something you need to experience also. And maybe I'm putting too much pressure out there.
That was my story.
Yeah.
The other thing that comes up a lot is people say, do I have to believe in it? Right? There's this whole thing around belief or they feel like they need to understand it first. I've got a friend who practices in the southern part of the state here in Missouri, and people often go to him and they'll go, how does this acupuncture work? And he goes, that's a great question. Let me ask you a question. How does Western medicine work? Right? A lot of times we will use things for our medicine and healing, and we actually don't understand them, or we have a rudimentary understanding, or we think we understand it. But we kind of believe it. So I'm back to this thing here, is belief necessary? And actually the answer is belief is not necessary, right? The patient doesn't have to believe that it's going to help. And actually the practitioner doesn't have to believe it's going to work either. They just have to know what the system is, how the system works, and apply the system, right? So what's the best way to find out if it works? See if it works for you. Now, a lot of times people go, oh, I tried acupuncture. I did it 2 or 3 times. It didn't work. And it doesn't, so first of all, it doesn't always work for everybody. It works for most people. It doesn't work for everybody. Sometimes it takes more time to work. Some people respond quickly. Some people take more treatments. And the other thing is, one thing doesn't always work for everybody, right? There's treatments that may be chiropractic, or maybe there's medicines that people have taken, and it's been very helpful for them, but it doesn't help their spouse, or it doesn't help their cousin. So the best way to see if it'll be helpful for you is go find a practitioner, give it a fair trial. Fair trial is 2 to 4 treatments. You shouldn't, will it take your problem away in that length of time? Depends on the problem and how long you've had it. But within that period of time, you'll probably notice some things for at least a period of time have been different. And if that's the case, then it's probably worth pursuing a little longer.
Now, I've been to several acupuncturists, and ranging from, I would say, trained here in the U.S., and one of them was actually, she was born in China, went through the pre-med training there. They go through really extensive training, at least from what I learned from her, where she lived. And so there was even a range of practices there, from an acupuncturist just treating me with needles, or to an acupuncturist treating with needles and herbs that were pre-bottled and formulations. And then to an acupuncturist, the one who originally came from China, who did the needles, but then also would do raw herbs. And so to give this a fair shot, would you say that just doing the acupuncture itself without the consultation for herbs and a practitioner talking to you about what's going on in your body? Do you think that level of awareness and even taking herbs into the perspective is important to give it a fair shot?
Right. Well, a good acupuncturist should talk to you in depth about your body as well, just as an herbalist would. In the States, you'll often find people that do acupuncture and herbs, but sometimes people just study acupuncture. Traditionally, and my experience in Asia is people, generally speaking, are either trained as an acupuncturist or they're trained as an herbalist. It's rare to find someone who is equally skilled at both, right? So I worked with acupuncturists there that maybe had a little herbal training, but it was actually quite rudimentary. And then I've worked with herbalists that, maybe they've got a little acupuncture, but they don't really do acupuncture, right? They mainly do herbs. It's been more of a modern thing for people to do both. And you see that a fair amount in the States. If you're going to see somebody for herbal medicine, you really want to check and see what their training is, because doing Chinese herbal medicine is part of the scope of practice of an acupuncturist in the United States. But their training could actually just be, a couple of quarters or some weekends. So you really want to look into what kind of training they've actually had. And often the folks that don't have a lot of training, they'll use the patent medicines or, the bottled medicines, as you were saying. A skilled herbalist will know how to use raw herbs. And there's often the question too, which one's better, which one's more powerful, which one should you use? My answer at this point is the one that you will take, right? Are the herbal decoctions more powerful? I think they are, but they're only more powerful if you take them. And a lot of folks don't want to go through the bother of taking the herbs home, stinking up the house by cooking them for an hour and a half, and then you got to drink them. They'd rather just take a tablet.
Right.
So, if all you're going to do is take a tablet, then take a good high quality tablet. But does that answer your question? I'm sorry, I got a little long-winded.
No, that's cool. That's it's good information. What I'm kind of inferring too is that just even give acupuncture a shot. If they're just a skilled acupuncturist, which it sounds like there's higher qualifications that you need to go by wherever you are in the U.S. Maybe
there are, and there are people. I mean, it depends on the state you're in. Okay, so in some states, I live in Missouri, for example. And chiropractors with 100 hours of training are allowed to call themselves an acupuncturist. And they do acupuncture, right?
And that's very little training. Just by comparison to become a registered yoga teacher, you have to have a minimum of 200 hours of training.
Yeah. So this is 100.
Yeah.
And my training was, thousands. I mean, it was a 3-year program. So, again, look at the amount of time someone has spent with something. It's not always a guarantee that they're skilled, but they're more likely to be so. If nothing else, they've been able to get through a bunch of time and study. Yeah. And that's usually helpful.
And I have a relative who would go to a chiropractor and would use like a type of electrostim acupuncture to help pain in a joint. And so, I could see, 100 hours of training to learn how to relieve pain in a joint. But anyways, I think I'm getting too much into this topic of how to find the qualified person. So yeah, each state is going to be different. Just to summarize, each state is going to be different on their qualification.
Each state will be different. If you're really looking for someone who's got some training and background in acupuncture, you're looking for someone other than the state of California, which has its own exam. You're looking for someone who has an NCCAOM qualification. It's a national exam that acupuncturists take. They have to have gone through at least a 3-year program, then they've got to pass the national exam. So, it's a minimum standard.
Yep.
So that's something to watch for.
I'll put that in the show notes. It'll make it easier for people. So let's name a few of the myths that people may come in, maybe curious about acupuncture, but maybe holding them back. One of the ones that I hear is just even a general fear about needles, which you kind of addressed already, that it's not the type of needle that you're getting an injection from.
Right. So that's a piece of it. And people have a fear of needles. Well, not everybody. A lot of people don't, but many people do, and they have it for a good reason. They've had bad experiences with needles.
You included.
Me included, right? I mean, it's funny, I'm an acupuncturist, but I'm still very shy about needles. I don't like strong stimulation. I like a very gentle sort of stimulation. So, of course, the first question is always, is it going to hurt? Mm-hmm. And the answer is acupuncture has sensation. I wouldn't necessarily call it pain. Okay? So the Chinese have a couple ways of describing the feeling of acupuncture. When an acupuncture point has really been activated, they'll say it's ma ma de, which means it's sort of numb, or it's zhang zhang de, which means there's kind of a heavy, distended, almost sore muscle feeling. And a lot of people will get that feeling, especially that heavy, distended feeling. And that means that the point has really been accessed well by the needle, and more importantly, been accessed well by the body's response to the needle. I would say, generally speaking, acupuncture is extremely comfortable. It has sensation. The sensation is not pain. And most people find it to be profoundly and curiously and deeply relaxing. Mm-hmm.
I would agree. I try to be real on this podcast, but I have woken up from naps in acupuncture with little piles of drool at times. It's been so relaxing. Yeah.
There's that. And the other thing, and I find this interesting, people often, they'll kind of come awake and they'll go, oh, I thought I was home. And when I hear that word home, I'm hearing capital H, home.
Yeah, and you're kind of gesturing to your heart there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes a big difference. I have definitely been there, or you feel like you've been in a time warp. Like, yes. All of a sudden the acupuncturist comes in and you're like, has it been however long already?
Right. It went by fast. So there's actually, and this is common, Western science as to what's going on here. There's basically 3 modes that human beings can inhabit. There's the sympathetic, parasympathetic, and sleep. So the sympathetic mode is commonly called fight and flight, right, or stress mode. And that's when, at the very, extreme, there's a danger in our environment and we're either going to fight it or we're going to run away from it. We often have chronic stresses these days that'll keep us just like slightly hanging out in that sympathetic mode. And in sympathetic mode, a number of things happen. The blood comes away from the internal organs. It moves more into the muscles. We have stress hormones come into our system, which helps sharpen our focus to our environment, because we need to be really, on it with what's happening around us. And also the digestive system begins to shut down a bit, because if you're about to be someone's lunch, you don't have the time to digest your own lunch, right? And so if we spend a lot of time in that sympathetic sort of stress mode, and a lot of us do. Someone pulling out in front of you in traffic will trigger it. Stress at work will trigger it. A lot of things will trigger it. We're a little jacked up. We're constantly sort of on edge. That's the sympathetic. The parasympathetic mode is when we can move into relax and restore. The stress hormones come out of the system. One of the first things that happens is the digestive system comes back online, which is why when you get on an acupuncture table and you start to have needles put into you, you'll often hear your stomach gurgle. And the reason for that is you're switching from sympathetic mode into parasympathetic mode, and you can rest, restore, and digest again. And it's really only in that parasympathetic mode and in sleep mode, which is similar to parasympathetic, that our bodies are able to heal and restore themselves. Again, if you're about to be someone's lunch, your physiology knows better than to try to take care of restoring the body. There may be nothing to restore in 10 minutes. It's only when we're in that calmer state. And so that deep calm that people go into in acupuncture is part of why acupuncture works and part of how acupuncture works, because it's only when we've dropped into that physiological state that we're able to heal.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. And it occurred to me while you were describing that too, that I think just one trip to the acupuncturist has been better at times, at least in relaxing my body, than a vacation.
Mm. Well, vacations can be stressful. And it depends on what you like to do on vacation.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So if you want a cheap getaway, relatively, visit the acupuncturist.
Yes. Take a trip and never leave the table.
Right.
Yeah.
Truly. Yeah. I've been there. It's been great. So what are maybe one or two other myths that you hear and see people come in?
Yeah. Acupuncture is this magical thing that's going to change my life in one treatment.
But won't it?
On occasion, it does. Right? On occasion, it does. But by and large, we did not get to where we are. I mean, whatever it is that took us to see the acupuncturist, we probably didn't get there in a day. And we probably didn't get there in a week or a month. It's usually over the course of years, we've sort of lived our way into it. We, generally speaking, have to live our way back out.
But I think you brought up a great analogy before about the plumbing. Rarely the older the house is, the older is the plumbing, the longer have been the issues that have been going on. And it may not just be the leaky sink. There may be, the other issues going on before that. Right.
Yeah, there certainly is that. So a lot of people think it's this magical one and done. Usually not. Mm-hmm. Now, that doesn't mean that you've got to wait this long period of time before you see results. You'll often see results. In fact, you'll often see results early. And quite often, this is curious. This is a curious phenomenon. Often, people in a first treatment, it's like they'll get a glimpse of where they can be, right? Because something really shifts, and it shifts fundamentally. But then the next treatments don't give you that gigantic shift like you had the first time. So sometimes I think the acupuncture will give you a glimpse of where you can be, and it'll give you a nice big start. But then you've got to work your way. You've got to sort of live your way into this other way of being that allows you to be symptom-free or healthier or, whatever you want to call it.
Are there certain conditions that you do see get very quick response, or is it really depends on the individual?
It's a good question. To some degree individual, and then there's, at least for me, I often see good response and fairly quick response with digestive issues, with some psychoemotive issues. Often people's anxiety will really settle down over the course of just a couple of weeks. Mm-hmm. I've seen women get pregnant pretty quickly that were having issues. I mean, not everybody, but sometimes women will get pregnant very quickly with some acupuncture. What else? Migraine headaches usually take a long time. Sometimes certain musculoskeletal things will clear up very, very, very quickly. One of the reasons why acupuncture is famous for treating pain.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I get questions, through doing this podcast and so forth. And so I try to find guests that would also help with these people's questions. And one was recently about frozen shoulder. Is that one that acupuncture tends to address pretty well, or what's your perspective on that?
Well, it's funny because oddly enough, lately I've had a bunch of people with shoulder issues,
really?
Including one woman with frozen shoulder. Yeah, like frozen.
Mm-hmm.
So frozen shoulder usually takes some time. And especially if it's a severe case, do not look for it to clear up in a few days, and do not look for it to clear up in a few weeks. You'll be really disappointed. And it's an unrealistic expectation. Frozen shoulder on its own will often clear up over the course of months, usually years, year or two, right? My experience with acupuncture is it can dramatically shorten that timeline. So instead of waiting for a year or two for your shoulder to get better, it could be the course of months, maybe half a year.
And do you recommend, because from my experience, at least with some of the acupuncturists, there's more of a holistic overview of how to treat oneself. So if someone came into you with frozen shoulder issues, would you just do acupuncture, or would you recommend any other supplementary activities or therapies? for them?
Good question. So I'm also an herbalist. So I'll often include some herbs in that. We'll take a look at lifestyle, things that are helpful or not helpful. So if you've got an issue with your shoulder and you keep going to CrossFit, probably not going to be helpful. Since we're talking about frozen shoulder, often I find some really gentle kinds of exercise. I mean, we're Americans. We think we have to like push through stuff, right? Often it's more like we just have to sort of calm down a bit and release stuff. So some of the gentler movement practices, Tai Chi, Qigong, maybe yoga to some extent. I'm not talking about athletic yoga. I'm talking about more restorative yoga. Things that gently stretch the connective tissue, things that gently stretch the tendons and muscles and things like that. That I think can be really helpful stuff. And the reason it is because it just improves the circulation of blood and lymph and fluids. Areas that are tight are by definition starved for nutrition. And they're often a little bit toxic because they can't get the waste products out. So any movements that you can do that gently allow that ebb and flow of blood and fluids to move easily through the body is just going to help with all the different cellular respiration and help with the healing process.
Sorry, I thought you were finished there. Didn't mean to speak over you.
You're fine.
Isn't it amazing that these cultures, that have these ancient forms of medicine and science, also have these exercises or gentle forms of exercise that just kind of seem to be matched?
Yes. Yeah. And they tend to be more gentle. And they tend to be circular, and they tend to be spiral, which is so helpful in getting all the connective tissue to really move well in the body.
Yeah, well, we have rounded joints and muscles, and I guess that makes sense for our bodies, doesn't it?
Well, you probably won't find any straight lines in nature either.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. So are there any other myths that you would like to take a chance to dispel here in our conversation?
Yes.
This is almost like, I would imagine, acupuncturist therapy. It's
acupuncture therapy. Is there anything else you need to say about that?
Yes.
Yeah. So here's a great one. You don't have to be Chinese to know how to do acupuncture.
Oh, okay.
You simply have to have applied yourself to the training and understand the principles and understand the methods and have enough experience to know how it works in real life. And you don't have to be Chinese to do that.
But that said, it seems like you've gone to a great length to understand things from a Chinese perspective, having, am I right? I remember reading, you've gone to China, you've learned the language, studying, ancient texts.
Yeah. Well, yeah. We have some of Chinese, well, these days more and more we have stuff translated into English. But the vast storehouse of Chinese medicine is oddly enough in Chinese.
Imagine that.
Oddly enough. So the school that I went to, and this was a while ago, they required us to learn to read Chinese. And not to read menus or newspapers or anything like that, but just to be able to read medical Chinese. And I'm a really poor student of language. And so when I got out of school, I could kind of, sort of, but I wasn't very good at it. And after being in practice for a few years, I had an opportunity to go to Asia for a spell and kind of got tricked into studying Chinese, which turned out to be a good thing because, now I can read the storehouse, the treasure house of Chinese medicine. And so yes, I did go there, and I find it helpful to be able to access that material directly. So it's useful, but again, you don't have to speak it, and you don't have to read it to be a good practitioner, right? I mean, as long as you've somehow learned to acquire the fundamentals and understand how to apply it, then most of the learning that any practitioner gets is from their patients and their clinical experience.
Yeah, I'm
just kind of geeky, so I learned the language.
Well, it makes sense. I'm actually a linguist. I love languages. And, so one thing that I can really appreciate is the understanding one gets just kind of by osmosis, but also I think how your brain is wired, because learning the language and being a part of a culture, you're literally being a different person.
Yes.
In that environment. And so,
oh my God, it's so true.
I could appreciate how, while I agree you wouldn't have to be Chinese to be a great acupuncturist, but I could see you being able to understand things a little bit more on a deeper level because of understanding, having that hardwiring in your brain, that new way of thinking, because it literally is a different way of thinking.
It's a totally different way of thinking. I mean, it's funny you bring it up. I mean, there's times when I try to solve a problem and I get really stuck in English, but I'm a little bit of a different person in Chinese. And so sometimes if I can't solve a problem in English, I'll switch to Chinese as a way of thinking about it, and I'll get a different point of view of what I'm dealing with. It's really kind of wild. The other thing about being in the culture and studying Chinese is that there's aspects of Chinese medicine that are actually very, in some ways, are very simple and fundamental, and yet to my Western mind, it's still kind of goofy. You know, like drinking ice cold water, right? To a Westerner, it's like, so what? Big deal. Live in Chinese culture for a while, you start to really get how and why it's a big deal. And so there's aspects of just being in that culture that inform why the medicine is the way it is and why people think the way they do in those terms, because there's a cultural overlay to the medicine. And so having that cultural piece, for me, it clarified a lot of questions and things that just didn't make sense before.
Did you find that there were innately things in the language that it would have to be explained here? Like, I don't know, I'm just guessing. But I would imagine, or just having a semi-familiarity with the Chinese characters, that they're built up of little characters sometimes, that so the message is within that word.
The message is within that word. So yeah, this is one of the great things about being able to read Chinese, and especially if you can read the more traditional form, the complex characters, because there's all kinds of information inside the character about what it means.
Well, thank you for satisfying my language geekiness moment. I won't go too far down that road because
oh man, I could go way down that road. That is such an interesting one. But
I love languages for so many reasons like that. But your podcast is really about simplifying, or at least trying to explain these what can seem like really abstract concepts in Chinese medicine, acupuncture, to would I say even our Western world, our North American American culture?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, actually, I don't do the explaining. I'm the host of the show. And what I do is I seek out practitioners who have been at it long enough that they can speak about what they do in a very simple and common English language. So I get people that are really skilled and really smart and experienced, who can talk about what they do in everyday plain English. And then we talk about it. So they're actually the ones that are doing the explaining.
Yeah, it's a fun way to do it.
It is.
And you meet some really cool people in the process.
Totally. Oh my God.
So a recent podcast that you did was about sugar, which I thought was fabulous. So this was one it was a solo podcast, which I think was a fabulous job. It was very, very easy to listen to. It didn't sound like a lecture or anything. It was very informative and just felt like someone was chatting with you. And I do have a question from that podcast though, because so when you're talking about sugar, and you did talk about reading labels and the various names that sugar can be disguised as.
Yes.
But what's your viewpoint from your perspective, obviously, about like, let's say, fruits, how often should we have our fruits? What do they, or like, it's really touted these days to do like a morning shake kind of thing. So I know there's kind of two questions, but if you wouldn't mind, tell me what you think.
So this is not Chinese. What I'm about to say is not Chinese medicine. It's more Western metabolic science, which I've really been enjoying reading lately. And and partly I got into it because of problems that I just couldn't seem to get solved in my clinic, and just noticing certain patterns in my clinic. So let me just back up a little bit in case there's geeky people out there. About 10 years ago, I read a book written by a guy named Gary Taubes called Good Calorie, Bad Calorie. And the thing is like that thick, and it's dense. It's like neutron star dense. He's not a medical guy. He's an investigative journalist is what he is. But he really got into looking at metabolic science, and he got really into looking at sugar and sort of how we got the recommended daily diet that we get from the government. And it really opened up my eyes to a number of things about metabolism. And the main one being that it's not a matter of calories in, calories out. It's really a matter of what calories are they? Are they from fat? Are they from carbohydrate? Are they from protein? Because each of those is going to get metabolized in a different way. And depending on how they get metabolized, that's going to do different things to your body that may be helpful or could be deleterious. When it comes to sugar, it gets even more complex because you've got glucose, which is basically the fuel that our bodies run on. Actually, our bodies run on two fuels. It runs on glucose or it runs on ketone bodies. Ketone bodies come from fat. Glucose comes from, well, carbohydrates, basically. Mm-hmm. Regular table sugar is 1 part sucrose, 1 part fructose. These are different kinds of sugars, and they get metabolized in slightly different ways. So the sucrose is going to raise your blood sugar, but the fructose does not raise your blood sugar. So it used to be thought of as the safe sweetener for diabetics. The problem is glucose goes to your liver and gets metabolized into fat rather quickly.
That's the table sugar, right?
Say that again?
The table sugar.
The table sugar gets it's made up of two different molecules. One sucrose, one fructose. So the fructose is going to get metabolized in your liver. The sucrose is going to get turned into glucose, and that's going to be used by the cells in the body if your cells are sensitive to insulin. Okay? And in a healthy person they are, but in a lot of people like diabetics or people that are obese, they're not sensitive to insulin. So it's hard to metabolize sugar, and when sugar doesn't get metabolized, the body just turns it into fat. Mm-hmm. Back to your question of what about fruits? I would say that we need to be more cautious with fruits than most people think. And you also need to look at the glycemic load and glycemic index of a fruit. So what does that mean? It means what's the effect that it's going to have on your blood sugar. There are some fruits like berries, for example, they're high in fiber, and they don't particularly raise the blood sugar that much, right? And I would call those safer fruits. But there's other things like pineapple and watermelon. I can't think of others off the top of my head, but they will very quickly turn into sugar, and they'll very quickly raise your insulin levels. And that causes all kinds of problems, especially if you've got any sort of weight issue or any sort of intolerance to sugar. So I think we need to be really careful about not eating too much fruit. Think about this from an evolutionary standpoint. Most of us Northern European types, we didn't eat fruit all the time. I mean, now we have access to it every single day. And we're told, eat your fruits, eat your vegetables. But, it used to be we only had fruits for maybe 3-4 months of the year. And we'd eat the heck out of them, then we wouldn't eat them for months on end, right? So I think we have to be a little careful with fruits. And in terms of sugar, is there a safe sugar? Is there a better sugar? Especially if you have a sweet tooth, and especially if you have any sorts of inflammation in your body, then it's probably better to think of it in terms of sugar is sugar is sugar is sugar is sugar. And less is probably better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good way of, a good overview of how to look at things. Because that can be a real, one of the reasons I do this podcast is because there's so much information out there. Which information do you follow?
Right. So back to your smoothie thing.
Mm-hmm.
more veggies, less fruit.
Mm-hmm.
Try to make it more savory than sweet.
And that's challenging for our culture, a green drink or green blended drink doesn't sound very appetizing.
Well, I drink a green drink in the morning, right? And just so that I can like stay congruent with myself and know what I'm getting into, yeah. I call it pond scum. Right? So I'm not expecting something sweet. I'm actually expecting something that, it's probably a little bit bitter. It's in some ways it's much more filling and satisfying.
What do you put in yours?
Well, actually my wife is a really amazing cook, and she's the one who often makes these up. But we tend to put in some kale, maybe a little bit of apple, some nut butter, carrots. I usually put some Chinese herbs into it. I toss in a little turmeric. I like a little spirulina, maybe some collard greens.
What do you use? Do you just use water to blend it?
I use water. And I don't use ice.
Yeah.
Can I go on a rant for a second about ice?
Absolutely. I'm on board.
All right. So this is a Chinese medicine thing, and it's actually really, really important, and it's really, really simple. And most Westerners are going to go, "What, Michael Max? What are you talking about?" Mm-hmm. For the health of the digestion, and especially for women who have issues with their menstrual cycle, stay away from icy drinks and stay away from cold foods. Right? So this thing about put ice in your smoothie and drink it, it's a great way to disrupt your metabolism. Right? And why do I say that? The reason I say that is because our bodies are 98.6. And if you put something cold, well, think about cold for a moment. All right? Today in Missouri, it's like 27 degrees outside. It's crazy. If I go outside in a short sleeve shirt and shorts, I'm very quickly going to start shivering, and all my muscles are going to start doing this, right? They're going to contract and spasm. When you put cold stuff in your stomach, and especially if you have stomach issues, it's causing that warm tissue to contract and spasm. So you have any sort of stomach pain or digestive issues, putting those cold fluids in is going to be a problem. Then your body has to take energy that it would otherwise use for digestion to warm that stuff up before it can actually start to metabolize it in any sort of meaningful way.
That's a really good summary. I'm a person who naturally feels a little cold to begin with, so yeah. I don't like cold drinks.
Yeah.
It has to be a really, really hot day for me to want something that's, a little cooler.
Yeah.
So that intuitively makes sense. Because even, there'll be people chewing on ice, and it just gives me shivers just watching and hearing them do that.
Yes.
Once you get into the study, even the basic studies of acupuncture, like you just explained, or Chinese medicine, it makes sense.
Yes.
It actually takes work for your body to be digesting, and part of that process is essentially cooking your food. I mean, it's not cooking like heating, but it is a cooking.
We are biochemically cooking our food. That's what all the digestive enzymes and stomach acid and all that stuff does. Is it literally cooks the food.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you're stunting that process by adding the ice or the cool.
Yes.
Cool stuff.
So a lot of people say they love their fluids icy cold. I think it's more a habit that they've acquired. And I invite people to just do a 30-day free trial, just as a data point, just check it out, see if Michael Max is crazy or not, and avoid the icy drinks, drink either room temperature or hot, and just do it for a month. Just do it for a month. At the end of the month, see how you feel, and then even better, go drink a big icy glass of ice water, see how you feel.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, we could go on for hours. I have a few other questions in mind, but I think that'd be good you have many podcasts for listeners to listen to.
Oh my God, yeah, I'm up to like 66 of them.
Yeah, that's terrific. On really great topics. So I purposely didn't cover too much, like what kind of conditions could be treated by acupuncture and so forth, or helped by acupuncture, because you do cover that in your podcast. And so tell us how people can learn more about you and what you offer.
Okay, so a couple ways. There's the podcast, everydayacupuncturepodcast.com, and you're welcome to go there, or just go to wherever you like to get your podcasts, and you can get it there. Over on the website, of course, there's show notes page and resources. So there's that. There's my clinic website, which has all kinds of information about Chinese medicine, and that is yongkangclinic.com. And you can, I'm not going to spell it, you can put it on your show notes page. And I've got a fairly extensive blog that I do my very best in plain English to explain how acupuncture helps with a lot of different medical conditions that people often come in for. And there's also, I write a monthly newsletter, and my patients complain if they don't get it. It's not a bad newsletter. So if you want to get a little something in your email once a month, totally spam-free, different ways of using this old Chinese science to keep yourself out of the doctor's office, and that includes my office. You might want to sign up for the newsletter. And then the last thing I have is something for folks. If you think sugar is an issue for you, if you have cravings, if you've got weight issues, if you've got metabolic issues, and you really want to get yourself off sugar, I've got a thing called the Journey Beyond Sugar, which is a 45-day guided inquiry that arrives in the email that asks for like 10 or 20 minutes of your day. And it's a process that very gently and naturally, using Chinese medicine, modern neuroscience, some regular science, just some inquiry and writing, you can, in a gentle way, move yourself away from having a sweet tooth. The reason I did that is because I've seen so many people with so many problems that came back to the inflammation and metabolic mischief caused by sugar. And the best way that I thought I could help people is help them to get off the sugar.
That's really great. That sounds like a great program, covering from different perspectives there too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining me today and sharing so many of your insights. It was a lot of fun. I'm glad that you jumped in and wanted to share some of your pet peeves too.
Thanks for having me on the show.
I appreciate it. You have a wonderful day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Thanks so much for tuning into the Wait For You Wellness podcast. Have you taken the body type assessment yet? Did you know that the body typing assessment actually has its roots in traditional Chinese medicine and acupuncture? Yeah, by finding out about your body type, you'll also learn the real basics, the very helpful basics of traditional Chinese medicine. Just go to waitforyouwellness.com and you can take the test there and also get a free copy of my ebook, the body typing book, You-niversal Self-care. Also, while you were listening to this, did you think of a friend that you thought, oh, I bet they could really use this, or this was just what we were talking about the other day? Go ahead and send this to them. You can just suggest that they visit waitforyouwellness.com and check out episode 59. Or if you're listening on a device, you can usually share from that device as well. And just make sure you specify that this is episode 59. And if you feel in an extra sharing and giving mood, please go to iTunes and rate this podcast. Let people know that this is a valuable and helpful podcast to listen to help you on your wellness journey. We would appreciate that so much. And always feel free to contact us through the website and on social media. We love hearing from you. Thanks so much. Have a great day.